begin. Welcome, T3 cohort members and invited guests, to another Green New Deal Housing T3 webinar, The Green Track for HVAC, with guest instructor Rebecca Olson. I'm Rachel Wagner, and I have my co-host with me, Josh Vandenberg.
Hello, Josh Vandenberg here. Good to see everyone.
Right. This webinar is part of Green New Deal Housing's Train the Trainers project. We'd like to thank the T3 sponsorship and support of the University of Minnesota, RSDP, the Regional Sustainable Development Partnership, the Energy Conservatory, and Minnesota Power for making this project possible. We ask that you keep muted unless you are speaking. That's not necessarily the case for co-hosts because we're going to try to really have a conversation here. And T3 cohort members are encouraged to ask questions and join the conversation as we go. You can also put thoughts and questions into the chat. Our guest today is Rebecca Olson of CEE. Rebecca Olson is the Senior Director of Residential and Community Energy at the Center for Energy and Environment. She directs activities related to all residential and community-based programs, including energy audits, new home consulting work, pilot project implementation, local government energy action planning, contractor engagement, and equitable workforce development. She leads a strong team that works across disciplines to bring the most effective energy efficiency solutions to residents, owners, contractors, and communities. Since 2006, Rebecca has had various roles in the energy efficiency industry, including energy auditor, building science educator, and program director. She has served on various industry and community-related boards, including the Minnesota Building Performance Association, the Building Performance Institute's Standards Technical Committee, the Minneapolis Energy Vision Advisory Committee, Green New Deal Housing, and the National Building Performance Association. We are just thrilled to have you with us today, Becky. We are looking forward to a robust conversation on the topic of HVAC for better homes and about training our existing and incoming workforce in greener construction practices and integrated HVAC systems that result in healthier buildings without fossil fuels available to everyone. Simple goal, right? We have some questions prepared as well, so we'll start with those and see where it takes us.
Awesome. So Becky, we think of you as a Renaissance woman in regard to housing, energy, and building performance. And we're going to get into the HVAC conversation really soon, but can you first tell us a little bit about yourself and how you kind of ended up where you are right now in your career?
Sure. And thank you all for welcoming into this space. And so I'm really excited to be here and talk about the work that I do. And it's just always funny to listen to your dossier being somebody else. I'm very Minnesotan and that I get really embarrassed, but thank you for all those kind words. So I have been in this industry since 2006. Previous to that, I have a degree in architecture and was working in a local firm in Minneapolis, kind of doing model building, which was kind of my first foray into some construction work, ran a wood shop, a model shop. And part of that journey was realizing that I wasn't really very excited about the architecture industry and how much many of the architects I was working with knew about how buildings work together. And so I sort of told myself that if I was going to pursue that pathway, that I wanted to have more experience in construction and understanding how buildings work. So then I left that and did some residential construction work. And I was also, I had an opportunity to kind of intern for a sort of at the time green sustainable building organization and kind of start to dabble in that. Shortly after that, I started working for a nonprofit that did lead hazard prevention, part of which was replacing windows for lead hazard reduction in homes. and liked that. But the other part of that organization was doing low-income weatherization work. And so I was able to have the opportunity to start working in that part of that organization. And at that point, I really realized how much I loved the energy efficiency, home performance world. So that was 2006. It's a long journey to get to 2006. And I started out doing low-income weatherization energy audits. Did that for about 3 years. And then the Obama-led stimulus package in 2009 hit, which was a huge influx of funds into that program. And so our kind of small operation had to advance really quickly. So then I was able to become the director of that program and kind of lead more of the visioning and the activities. And so I did that for 3 years, and then was able to get a job for a different nonprofit that did a lot of the similar work, but more for utility programs across the whole residential market. So low income, market rate, multifamily, single family, new construction. So it was an expansion into the kind of buildings that we were able to be in. And I've been doing that since 2012 as the director of that. And then a couple of years ago, I've expanded my work into also leading our team that does community consulting and working with local units of government and other levels of community to do energy action planning, policy development, et cetera. So that's been a really fun thing to add sort of on the macro level to my work. And then, oh, I forgot to add that also a couple years ago, we had the opportunity to start a workforce development program. We had been realizing for the last 5 to 10 years that we have a shortage of workers in this industry, and that we're going to continue to have a bigger shortage. And so I kind of kept waiting for somebody who was more versed in workforce development to pick up the torch on this, and they didn't. And so we had the opportunity to fund it. And so we're running a workforce development program with many partners, which is the key element in that. And I can talk a little bit more about that later, but that's today.
Thank you.
Wow. You know, you're not the only person in this virtual room to have a varied track, and that's something that we seem to be encountering pretty regularly and finding, I think, that those of us who have sort of moved in more than one aspect of the business of buildings will maybe have a little more understanding and respect for all of the many different trades that interact, but also, I guess, as importantly, a little bit more sort of front and center consideration of the idea of systems thinking and integrated design, which is what this cohort just spent a couple hours talking about a week ago. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of loop in a lot of sort of systems thinking conversation, especially when you spoke about workforce training. I hope we get to that very soon, and we definitely have some questions about that for you. But one, I think, good lead in, and maybe another way of kind of setting up the big scope of conversation today is we wanted to ask you how your recognition of the impacts and realities of climate change affect how you approach the work that you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost hard for me to answer that question because I feel like it's so ingrained in the work that I do and my organization does. So I sometimes don't even really think about it as intentionally because that's sort of driving all the work that we're doing. But I would say that the realities of that just drive me towards continuing to fix buildings. At the end of the day, I want to fix buildings. However, we can do that, whether it's helping somebody in the construction trade understand that so they can do it, or at the state, city, or federal policy level. So I think it's just sort of in there that is the why of what I'm doing. There are other whys, but I think that's the biggest one. You know, how can I be as effective as possible in tackling that problem. And then sort of the other whys are that we have this lovely intersection of the same things that help fix that gigantic problem also helps people live better lives and have more comfortable buildings to be in and better air quality. And so this is really nice that those things sort of stack up, and the way that I approach doing that work is not super dogmatic, because if you're going to make change, you need to meet people where they're at. And so if I came from a totally dogmatic perspective of, kind of 100% decarbonization no matter what, then I'd lose the impact of my work, because I can't communicate with people from where they're at. And so myself and the organization I work for really do take a practical approach to saying, how can we chip away at this in a way that doesn't alienate people, and creates change in the long run as well. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's so well said. And I think kind of came up at our training last time too. I always say to my students at Western and then wherever I am, that we always want to be invited back to the table. So whatever we do, we have to make sure we're sort of laying the groundwork so that we're always, always there and part of the conversation. So no, that's terrific. And thank you. And our next one's a two-part question. The first part of it is, how do you see HVAC systems impact homes? Like what's the impact that HVAC systems have on homes? And then the other one is just a little nuance, but how do HVAC systems impact home building, that process of building that building?
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of flip it actually for you.
Sure.
Because HVAC systems can do whatever we want it to do, but if we're trying to kind of solve for those things that I just mentioned, which is really decarbonize as much as possible, delivering performance, which includes comfort and IAQ, then we need to think about actually the building more than we do the HVAC system. And why that is because if I want to get a low carbon emitting heating cooling system, then I need to make sure that my building keeps as much of that heating and cooling in as possible, as well as some other systems, right? So the distribution system, whether that's forced air through ducts or through hydronic for a radiator system, like all of that stuff needs to be super efficient if we're solving for decarbonization and comfort and performance. So I guess the impacts from the HVAC side on the building is a lot of times it's bad impacts if somebody doesn't consider all those things. So if we think about HVAC systems as these sum of the parts, then we miss some opportunities for integration to really maximize the potential. If we think about it as a separate machine that does this and a separate machine that does this, and don't worry about the machine in conjunction with the delivery system, then we don't really think about how this all affects occupants and the durability of the home. Sort of complex one. And hopefully that makes sense, but.
Well, it does intentionally, and I think this question was as much a conversation starter as just tell us your thoughts and we'll move right on. I mean, in some ways, this question is almost the crux of most of today's webinar, and your answer, and feel free to elaborate anywhere, and Josh, jump in because you teach this as well. In a short period of time, Becky, you hit on the things that I think are not only most relevant and important, but also most often misunderstood, dismissed, or overlooked. And all three of those, and those are three different things, right? Misunderstanding or being dismissed. It doesn't matter. We can do whatever we want. Systems will take care of it. It causes problems with comfort. It causes problems with money. It causes problems with functionality, and it certainly exacerbates the impacts of climate change. it's so tied in, and then what do you do that, what gets done that's really hard to undo? I mean, that's part of it too. Maybe talk a little bit about that as well, in terms of the impacts, sort of when decisions are made that, or a path, you sort of go down a path that's kind of hard to undo or untangle, even when you discover something doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, everything's flexible. It just is how
Good to
much
hear.
money does it cost to fix it, right? So I think what's very tragic to me is when new homes are built without these considerations, because that is just the perfect time to get it right. 'Cause I don't want to have to come back there later and fix it. Right? Nobody wants to pay me to do that. I don't want to be there. Somebody should get it right in the first place. Some of the big things that we see, and I will just acknowledge those three things that you said about, like, this is why it happens. It's overlooked, it's misunderstood. I forgot the third one, but it's very understandable. A lot of these are different trades. They've never sort of been tasked to work together. I think you might ask later a little bit more about where the industry needs to go, and part of that is that integration. So it's not, it's sort of understandable that it gets approached this way, in this piecemeal way. And I think we've had really forgivable HVAC systems that can just sort of overcome a bunch of bad stuff, and people are pretty good. People kind of tolerate poor-ish performance because it's good enough. And so I think there's also this lack of understanding of how much better it could be. And I think when you bring in the carbon impacts, that really brings home why it's important to be that much better. Because we can be pretty comfortable with kind of crappy systems, frankly. So I think, one big missed opportunity is understanding, even within the same trade of HVAC, is ventilation and heating and cooling together, and that distribution system. A lot of designs and contractors sandwich that together, and, like, Rachel, for example, has designed really wonderful homes that actually separate the delivery system of those two things, because they have different functions and they have different needs, and sort of it's an easy thing to be like, I already have a duct distribution system, so I will put my my ventilation system that brings in fresh air through that same thing, because it's already delivering. But they have different goals and different times that they need to be used, and different airflows, et cetera. So I think that there's oftentimes sort of I'm just going to slap this other thing I need to do in there, and it's potentially causing problems, but more likely just really missing opportunity to get as good as we can get it. Does that answer that?
Yeah. We might come back to this, or
Yeah.
loop it all in, right? And maybe this is a good lead in, to another question, which is taking this notion of sort of the impacts. How do or can HVAC systems fit into a paradigm of green building, specifically with regard to healthier, cleaner, and more equitable solutions for both new and existing housing? And yes, carbon is part of that, but when we're saying green building, we're talking about health, kind of first and foremost, or ability second. And so maybe talk a little bit more about that was a good example of the lack of separation, often in a forced air system, where the ductwork to deliver the heating or cooling air is also being used to deliver the ventilation air. And of course, in a house, right, often those furnaces, or even a heat pump air handler, is going to be delivering what, like anywhere between like 300 and 1,000 CFM, that's
More.
and yet a ventilation system is delivering what, or need
Yeah.
80,
50
120,
to
150,
200,
maybe
yeah.
200. Yeah.
Yep.
Um,
It's a complicated decision-making process, I would say. And I think one of the issues that we have in the moment is solving for all of these things. And I would say particularly carbon impact and cost. And when I talk about costs, I'm talking both about upfront system installation costs as well as ongoing utility bill costs. So one of the biggest things that I'm sure many of you have talked about and it's very popular in the media, it's a very amazing technology, is air source heat pumps. We love them. They're fantastic. And the reason that we love them and they're fantastic is that they're super efficient electric heating and cooling systems. The issue with that in terms of solving for cost, equity, carbon is that, I'm sorry, before I get to the issue on that, the great thing about going to a super efficient electric system is we know how to decarbonize our electric grid. We are getting renewables on our grid. We have low carbon potential sources that create electricity where natural gas, propane, fuel oil, the other sort of heating fuels that we use are much more costly to decarbonize, to impossible to decarbonize. So that's why the movement to electrify, and not just electrify with a very costly system, but with a very efficient system. So the tension really is in doing that, we're solving for carbon reduction and climate change mitigation. Fantastic, awesome. But natural gas is cheap in this country. Many places, and particularly in Minnesota and the Midwest, natural gas is very cheap, and electricity is also cheap relative to the rest of the country. But on a BTU delivery basis, it's about 3 to 4 times more expensive than natural gas. And so even though we're getting a very efficient system, we have the potential, if we're switching from a cheap fuel to a more expensive fuel, to solve for climate change and carbon reduction and raise people's bills. And we don't want to do that for a lot of reasons. One is that if that's sort of a market push and people that aren't necessarily focused on climate change, we still want them to change. They're not going to tolerate more expensive bills with something that is supposed to be good for them. And we particularly can't tolerate bill increases for people who are struggling to make ends meet. So there is some rate structure stuff that can be done on that high level macro, like policy level. We can have rates that are more favorable to electric, especially if it's electric heat pump rates. You know, there are ways that we can solve for that problem on a more systematic way. In the meantime, there's also ways that we can mitigate that on a home by home basis. Some people might be willing to pay for it and really have a lot of good information to prepare them for that, and maybe it's fine, right? So let's push those customers aside for a second. Then, sort of our main strategies are to you compare a transition from a low cost fuel to electric with heat pumps with an on-site solar system, right? So you're bringing a resource to help pay for that shift. That's not feasible in every single house, and we're not totally sure of the trajectory of the cost recovery for that in the future. But that's one way that I think definitely on the low income side, I've seen really successful programs deal with that cost shift. Another way is to do dual fuel in our cold climate. And this is maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this with heat pumps, but heat pumps work differently than fire in a gas furnace or even electric resistance. They are dependent on the outdoor air for their capacity and for their efficiency. So as the temperature lowers outside, they can't deliver as much heat and they become less efficient. And there's a point at which those kind of lines cross over and you need some sort of backup system, either for economics or for just the capacity of the system that is chosen for a particular house. So if that backup system is electric resistance, that can be very expensive. So we want to mitigate the amount of time that people use that if cost is a factor we're thinking about. Dual fuel is an option where that backup system is a gas system, especially for solving for economics. We still want to make sure that that's used very little because that's the high carbon potential source. But it's a really nice bridge in our minds for this discussion about how do we transition the bulk of this to a decarbonized system without raising low-income customers' bills and without a backlash from the market. We did a study in Minneapolis that looked at all of their 1 to 4 unit residential buildings and had this very complex way to sort of use real data to model very effectively. Anyway, the goal was to sort of understand what's needed to decarbonize their 89,000 plus 1 to 4 unit buildings. And one of the iterations on the model that we used was a fully electric heated system versus a dual fuel system. And dual fuel using natural gas as the second fuel. And the natural gas as the backup fuel switched over at a temperature outside of 5 degrees, which is about 80% of the heating load being used using the heat pump. We found that we got 95% of the carbon reduction goal than we did with that all electric system. And that was amazing to me because I think there's this idea that if you have any gas, you're not moving forward. But it's going to be a super useful bridge to where we can get to all electric systems that are low cost for people.
So to stay on this topic for just a moment, hearing you speak, I just feel like light bulbs are going on in my head because I listen to these conversations a lot and this sort of argument about, do we absolutely get rid of all natural gas now? And I happen to think that we should not be putting natural gas into new buildings, new residential buildings. I think there's no reason. I think we build more efficiently anyway. And so then the loads are low, whether it's affordable housing projects or market rate housing projects. I'm curious.
I agree.
Okay, I was going to
Just
ask
to clarify, so I was
disagree.
mostly talking about retrofits.
Well, right. No, this is where I'm going. This is exactly, yep. And I was curious to know, though, if you agreed on the new side. And so I think that my sort of boots on the ground in the industry, and I don't know, Becky, yours, Josh, yours, or some of the members who are listening, there seems to be this real tension of you're making us get rid of all the natural gas. And what you just said, I've never come out and said, I think that every single existing home, we got to pull all the gas right now. You can't have it anymore if it's there. So how do you, and something that you just spoke about, which I think sounds so elegant, is that you can maintain an existing system, maybe give it a longer useful life because you're going to use it less. You can dramatically reduce the carbon impacts of the existing infrastructure and the existing housing by adding air source heat pump technology that and then maybe really beefing up the dual fuel options for all houses. Maybe we need a statewide dual fuel mandate where it's a requirement, especially if you're getting an air source heat pump. And maybe if this is going on at the legislature, is it even possible? Because what you're saying about the 95% carbon reduction coupled with the affordability piece, that all of a sudden makes it sound like as much of a no-brainer to me for existing homes as the notion that all new housing should be all electric. Like, well, isn't that our solution then for every kind of housing?
There's a lot there, Rachel.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, go, but answer.
Well, I do want to, so I didn't really get to my third pillar that's sort of woven in between both the solar mitigation strategy and this dual fuel strategy, which is weatherization plus, right? So we need to treat the envelopes and get them to a level of insulation and air sealing that allows that lower switchover temperature of 5 degrees, because a leaky old house, that's going to be tough even for a really good heat pump system. So we do need to get to a pretty basic level of weatherization across all these homes. And then some homes might really need more deeper weatherization, which, maybe that is about at the time of residing, adding more insulation to the outside of the structure. From a building science perspective, that's a fantastic project. It's really kind of costly and difficult to do if you're not coupling it with another retrofit project. So we're trying to figure out ways to get those things
Becky, you froze on my computer. Is she frozen for others?
Yeah, she is for me too.
Okay, I'm gonna do a quick, it might be her location, although it looks like she's at work. I'm gonna tell her that.
Well, I think what she's talking about too, in terms of weatherization, is huge, and particularly in the existing buildings, right? So many of our buildings are existing buildings, so few are brand new. So we do have to, it's sort of the elephant in the room that we have to address those existing buildings, and that weatherization piece is so important. I think there's that when I start talking to you, she was talking about systems and doing dual fuel, and there's a part of me that's like, oh no, there's too many systems. But I think on the economic side of it makes so much sense. So it is, it is one of those things that I think we'll have to address and continue.
Am I back?
Yay!
You're back.
I'm so
yeah.
sorry. I
No,
don't
it's
know.
okay.
Something
Sorry.
about the Wi-Fi just
Yeah.
stopped.
Well,
I don't
Josh
know
was
where
in-
I froze.
Well, we want to get you back into the solar, but Josh was agreeing about just the importance of the whole weatherization piece and recognizing the broad spectrum and where maybe dollars have to go for assisting households that wouldn't have their own monetary needs, just the same way we assist with heat pumps, that we need to assist at a much deeper level. And then just what you were saying about, oh no, how many systems, so complicated. And yet, and we're going to get to this in a moment. let's hold that part of the question, Josh, for just two more about, and when are we just overly focused on systems? But Becky, you were talking about solar. I think you were gonna, you called it kind of the third pillar. And I'm curious where you were going with that.
Wow, I did not get very far then before I froze. I really wasn't talking about solar. I was just mentioning that throughout that the weatherization aspect is so important. I think that one of my main missions in this whole electrification buzzword, excitement, which like, I want to ride this wave, this is important. But my goal is to make people realize that the number one home electrification measure should be envelope improvements and not the heat pump second. So we need to fix these houses envelopes first, or in conjunction with heat pumps, or as part of the plan, at least eventually, because it has so many impacts. It's the biggest carbon reduction strategy we have. It's the lowest cost. It can reduce our carbon before we do anything else. So that needs to be really front and center. And through that Minneapolis study that we did, we had a pretty big stakeholder engagement process, both city staff as well as interested stakeholders. And through some of that data and analysis, we were able to really get that point across to say, like, this is the impact of just weatherization, and here's the cost. This is a no-brainer. We need to be doing this. And now they're working on, they have $10 million to spend on climate legacy initiatives a year, and now they're focusing a gigantic portion of that on home weatherization. So I do think there's a power in sort of understanding what are the biggest impacts. It is less sexy than solar and heat pumps, but it is super important, and it makes everything else work a lot better.
That's awesome. Thank you. I have a next question, but I don't know that this is such a great topic, but I'll jump into the next question and
go wherever you want to. We can stay on. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's oh, and actually we have one in the chat too. So, and it's, I don't know if you can see the chat, but it's really talking about what's that balance between improving this building or raising it, and what are some of those things that you have to take into consideration when you're doing that?
I mean, the embodied carbon aspect, which I am admittedly a lot less versed in, but embodied carbon is essentially all the carbon that went into making those materials. If we can reuse those materials, we should. That's a really important thing. Just producing materials for the building industry takes a lot of energy. And so, I think there's not a lot of houses that I go to or encounter that I say it would be better to get rid of this house and start from scratch. I think that most houses can get fixed, and I think that's a lot better of a strategy than new construction for those. That's my personal opinion.
No.
Sure, sure. Okay, so how do you see the HVAC industry changing? And is it changing in the way that it needs to be changing?
It's very, very slowly changing. And I guess my frustration is how slow. There's multiple problems with that accelerating quickly. One is that trades across the board are in need of more workforce. And so what that means is there's not enough HVAC companies. And so they can kind of do what they're not a lot of market forces to push them for change. And their bread and butter is the things they've been doing for the last half a century. That's what makes them money. That's what they know. And there's not a lot of market forces pushing them in that other direction. One of the things that we're working on at Center for Energy Environment is to move that market. And our main initiative thus far is our air source heat pump collaborative work, which started in Minnesota. And now we have a broader one in the Midwest, working with some other partners in other states. And the goal is to really sort of do this outreach to contractors, provide them resources, both sort of the business case, the sales techniques, the training that's needed, as well as connecting them with incentives that helps from a cost perspective that they can actually sell these systems. We've been doing that for about three or 4 years now, and it's slowly working, but it is slow. One of my radical ideas, I guess it's not super radical because it's working in other parts of the country, but maybe isn't super popular, is that we've been focusing on existing HVAC contractors and changing. And I think that there's so much to be done in this space. There's so many more companies needed, more workforce needed, that I think we need to start experimenting with contractors who have never done HVAC before, but that we can teach on this work and actually develop them into these home performance contractors, so that we have this opportunity for the first time in our market anyway, to integrate envelope improvements with HVAC and train them on this new technology and get them excited about it, because it is a kind of a wide open market at this point. And so that is some stuff that I would like to work on, while also working with existing contractors that, there are some that are really being proactive about making sure that their staff are ready to do these. But as an industry in general, we need far more companies doing this work and doing it in the right way.
So I want to grab on that, and I want to smash together 3 questions that we had all into one, because I do that, but I think it really is one. I think we're talking about something super, super important here. And I want to loop it back to, honestly, your answer to the first question, Becky, about your career trajectory and what you've done. I have had the pleasure of being face-to-face with you and talking about so many different HVAC systems. I have been in the room when you talked about installing your own air source heat pump in your home.
Hey.
And not many of us can say that, I'm pretty sure. But it really speaks to the opportunity which you just brought up, and the richness of not siloing our construction trades workforce, like I only do plumbing or HVAC or whatever. But if I am a building performance specialist, then perhaps, and I know when to bring in, someone who's going to be able to test the capacity of the refrigerant and not mess that up, but that there's this opportunity that you're talking about, or this idea we have. So here's the 3, the question all smashed together, which is, we were going to ask you, what do you wish every HVAC tradesperson understood? You may or may not answer that piece of it, but the idea of being overly focused on technological fixes. I love when you just said a little bit ago that the most important thing we can do for HVAC systems and decarbonization is enclosure improvements. And that goes for both our new and our existing buildings, I assume. And so what if we take that notion further? Like, okay, we're this technology focused society. Everybody's talking about the IRA and air source heat pumps. That's all we're hearing about. So how do we change the conversation? Like, what do you want out there, Becky, and I would say everyone, in terms of your thoughts on the concepts of appropriate technology, systems thinking, what every HVAC tradesperson needs to understand about systems thinking, integrated design, overall building performance, and then finally, how do we develop a workforce like that? Simple little questions. We can break that all down.
No,
I'm taking
I just want
notes.
to make sure I get through some of that stuff. So I think because we are solving for multiple problems and multiple outcomes like we've talked about, we can no longer think of it as a technology fix. It is a system fix because we are solving for system problems that interact with each other. So I think that's the biggest reason why we need more of this integration. And I think that there's going to be an opportunity to understand what type of business models work for different companies. So some of the most successful home performance contractors I know do it all in-house. They have an insulation crew, they have HVAC people, they have electricians. That's their company. They're doing home performance. Does that have to be the business model? Maybe not. You know, could it be a general contractor who generally understands the building science concepts, you know, houses the system, and then can pull in those trades, but really be responsible for that outcome? I think that could work too. You know, maybe they have 1 or 2 or 3 of those trades in-house. You know, I'm working with a contractor right now and trying to like think through with her how to develop her company into sort of doing more of this. She has this sort of high level understanding of building science. She has electricians on staff. And so I'm like, I think that you could really, you know, expand your business by doing this. So those are kinds of those things, but she doesn't want to bring in insulation in-house. So I'm like, that's fine. You know, as long as you have like sort of the concept and making sure that you're responsible for how these interact, I think that would be fine. So from my perspective, I am really interested in exploring how these different potential business models can do what we want it to do. We have played a lot of this role thus far in our market that we serve. So we deliver energy audits for customers across lots of areas, you know, primarily in the metro, but all over the state. And we have sort of developed that audit service, which is, you know, testing and giving recommendations into, we'll also help you get these projects done. So we have a pool of contractors we work with, some of which agree to specific pricing so that we can give the bids on behalf of them. So we're sort of like doing this. But I think we just need more companies able to do that, whether they're the contractor or another aggregator like us. We need more of it because customers still at the end of the day are having a hard time getting heat pump projects done. And if they get them done, there isn't a lot of consideration for the envelope. So I'm trying to remember all the parts of that question.
Well, the training sort of, I mean, I think you're leading into that. And what I was going to say, I was going to jump in and say, can you imagine like a mentorship or so you've been doing a bunch of workforce training. A lot of it is with folks who have barriers to traditional entry into employment. You're focusing, I know, on some building performance specifics of like, you know, insulation contractor, let's say, or energy auditor. And so, I'm curious, could you imagine, because CE has been so successful with sort of different models, could you imagine a model where you're training a cohort of folks that are interested in becoming more holistic building performance contractors, and they're coming and working?
Yes.
Yeah, I could see that working.
So maybe I'll
next-
just, maybe I'll talk about like what we're doing on the workforce development side currently and what I kind of see as a parallel path on a contractor development side that we haven't started yet, but I'm baking. So our workforce development program has really been about getting more workers into critical industries that we have had a hard time with our partner organizations or ourselves hiring. So that is residential energy auditors and then insulation installers. That's what we started with. That's by no means filling all the gaps, but that's where we're starting. And it is focused on bringing in people who have not traditionally been in this workforce. So our priorities are people of color and women, BIPOC women. And we're specifically recruiting from areas of concentrated poverty in the Twin Cities at the moment. We will be expanding that to greater Minnesota at some point. So one of the things that makes that program successful, or I guess the three things that I look at as making that successful, is that we have very strong, deep partnerships and paid partnerships to community-based organizations that understand the demographics and the needs of the people that we want to serve through this program and help us with recruiting. We have very robust training on these specific topics, plus credentials. And then we have a strong connection to the employer at the end. And if we don't have all those three parts, we're going to kind of be failing. And I think a lot of workforce has just focused on that middle part, which is the training. And we need this whole trajectory plus support, which includes paying people to get trained, paid internships, transportation stipend, support services for career readiness, financial readiness, all these things, which we've sort of built in this program. It's been great. We still have challenges and we continue to augment so that we can continue to serve more and more people. I would like to have sort of a similar robust pathway for supporting new contractors. So whether that's, I think, like I mentioned, a general contractor or maybe an electrician who wants to add a business line, recruiting businesses that are owned by people of color or women, so we can start to make this industry more equitable, and then support them through whatever they need. So is that HR and accounting services? Is that entrepreneurial services? Is that money to help support those things? And then connect those to the jobs that they'll get in people's homes. So I'm developing that, and it's in process, and I'm fundraising to see if we can work on that. But that's sort of the concept, I think, so that then now I have contractors getting developed as I'm developing workers, so then they can work with each other as well. Because one of our bottlenecks in the workforce program is employer hosts for some of this work. And so we need more employers.
And one of our cohort mentioned in the chat, said, don't forget about certifications. And I know that you guys have done a little bit of work with that. So can you talk a little bit about your approach and how you see that maybe even broadening when we're talking about, HVAC?
Yeah. And hi, I think that was Eugene. Hi, nice to see you. It's been so long. Yes, that is kind of a best practice in any workforce development, is that people have the chance to get credentialed along the way. So we have, we start with the building science principles credential through the Building Performance Institute. It's meant to be an entry level credential that stacks with other things. And then further along in that trajectory for participants that go on to do on-the-job training through an internship. At the end of that, we do credentialing for auditors, so BPI building analyst, and then for insulators, it's the air leakage control installer, all through the BPI umbrella. Those are just what we're doing right now. We're looking at, we're expanding into HVAC this coming year, and so we're looking at doing the EPA 400, I don't remember the name of it, but it's basically refrigerant handling certification. So yes, it is important to have credentials so that when people leave these programs, even if they're not shepherded through our system, that they'll have that to go, and then maybe later they pick it up.
Excellent. Excellent. We've got about 10 more minutes, and thank you for the chat. Eugene, others, please chime in either with raise your hand or just speak up or put it in the chat. And I got one again from Eugene. Eugene, do you want to speak it or do you want us to read it?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so you were talking slightly a little bit about, more air sealing needs to go into some of these existing housing stock uh, to justify a heat pump. And it makes a lot of sense. I really understand that. But I've had arguments with a couple of different architects regarding HRVs and ERVs in our northern Minnesota climate zone.
Mhm.
And from what I remember, from what I was taught, HRVs were the go-to system, replacing the air while recovering heat energy. And an ERV duty is to remove moisture in the air, which obviously helps with cooling a home down. Can you touch on that just a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So just to reiterate, so a heat recovery ventilator recovers heat between the outgoing air and the fresh incoming air. They don't mix air, they pass along each other so that they're exchanging some of that heat so you don't get super cold air coming in the winter, for example. And then additionally, so an ERV, an energy recovery ventilator, does that, and it exchanges some moisture, so that the best example is in the summer, you're not bringing in exterior humidity when you're trying to dehumidify your house. So the logic I think that you're talking about, Eugene, I used to think this way too, that like, okay, well, we're really solving for winter, so we don't want to exchange that moisture. In reality, what's happening is that our houses are getting really tight, which is fantastic. We need that for lots of reasons. And so we need a lot more fresh air exchange, so much so that we can really handle keeping in some of that moisture in the winter. And we almost need to, so that we're not overly drying our houses, because we need to get more fresh air for all these other pollutants, VOCs, NOx, all these other things that we just sort of need fresh air in an enclosed space for. And so the ventilation rates are getting high. And so we do want to keep some of that moisture in. And so generally, I'd say for a high performance building, we're going to want an ERV in there. And Rachel, you probably have more to add to that.
I, like you, have had a very similar journey. I was hard and fast, cannot use an HRV for 20 years. And within the last 5 years have shifted for similar reasons. And there seems to be more comfort and there's more air conditioning happening. So yeah. Also, I think that there was this huge fear about more freeze up, more freezing of the core in a very cold climate if you had an energy recovery ventilator. I don't know that has borne out. And at this point, I unless I dove super deep into it, I'm kind of like, use either. Just use a super efficient recovery ventilator.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and wasn't there a little bit of a cost difference early on in the industry too between the ERV, HRV, where ERVs were slightly more expensive, and so we're leaning towards HRVs, and now they seem sort of cost competitive too. So
Yeah,
there might have been some
I think
economics.
more manufacturers produce ERVs than used to, and so they're just this cost a lot cheaper.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the HRVs, at least up here, always have a condensate line. So you always have to deal with that condensate. So when you're doing a retrofit, it's something to consider. And we just had a house completed with an ERV and there's no condensate line. So is that common that an ERV doesn't emit condensate and you don't have that additional load that you have to figure out?
I think that's right, but don't quote me on that. I would refer this question to my trusty new homes manager, Phil Anderson. Okay. But yeah, okay, Saranda says yes, that's correct.
Saranda says yes. Yeah, so that's another piece to consider, which is, if especially in a retrofit. Cool. Some more questions. Let's see what we got.
While you're waiting for those, Rachel mentioned my DIY heat pump install. Not necessarily recommending that for the masses. It was very fun for me. And one of the nerdy things that I did in the last few years was start a club at CE called HVAC Club. And it was really along this impetus of many of us have these projects that we kind of know a lot about and see sort of failures in the field and want to do ourselves, but we kind of wanted to troubleshoot them. And so that was the impetus of this group, but it's really turned into, you know, a monthly conversation about the HVAC industry in general, as well as our own projects, and kind of helping us work through how do we tackle them on our own houses, and we're experts, like what are these barriers still, and how can we start to make this a little bit more templatized so it's easier for the industry.
We have a question from Saranda here. What's the single best HVAC system from an efficiency perspective in our climate? And Saranda's, that's Duluth, right? Okay.
Oh man, single best. This is a very, it depends answer. But generally, we should not be installing air conditioners anymore. If we're putting in an air conditioner, we should put in a heat pump. I would recommend a cold climate rated heat pump, because that will then allow us flexibility later, whether you're putting in or keeping an existing furnace. You know, if you're keeping a gas backup, whether that's propane or gas, whatever, if you're doing that for economics now, if you put in a cold climate air source heat pump, you can switch over to that cheaper fuel, for example, whenever you want, whatever outdoor temperature makes economic sense. But as those rates change and we have those things happening on a policy level, you have the ability to go lower and lower outside temperature, because that system can keep up and do its job. And then you're not solving anymore for the economics at a certain point. If all we're doing is putting in a standard heat pump, that's fine. That's better than an air conditioner. But I think in the next 20 years, which is generally the life of a system, we're going to want that flexibility. So I guess I would just say a cold climate air source heat pump as a replacement for air conditioning is sort of like, if I had to pick a single best. And then whatever uses backup system is going to kind of depend. Love to have that debate, though, because I could probably be swayed in many different directions.
For sure. Well, we got one more. What about, oh, here's a tough one.
Yeah.
Well, this is good. This is a great question. What about mini splits, meaning a ductless versus a fully ducted air source heat pump? And that's like a long discussion, but how about the short version?
Yeah, lots of disadvantages and advantages of both, or I guess pros and cons to each. In a retrofit situation, if there's already a pretty good duct system, I'd go centrally ducted. If you're in a situation in a retrofit that has hydronic heating, for example, we have found that the best way to do heat pumps is through mini splits, because we are evaluating air to water heat pump systems. So there may be better technology in the future to just like tie into an existing emitter system, but they don't really exist right now. If you're ready to replace all those emitters, then maybe. But in new construction, I think it really depends on the design of the house, the aesthetics, you know, there's a lot of things to consider for new construction. But I don't think there's like one wins over the other particularly. It's really about preference. That's my short answer, but I could probably spend 5 hours talking about that.
Well, I hope you will soon. Maybe we'll do a masterclass on HVAC. That's, I think.
Hey, yeah.
Right. And from sort of the perspective of holistic and systems thinking. And Saranda, we'll kind of close. Aren't the efficiency levels lower in the air to water?
I don't know the answer to that. When I've talked to our research staff that's working on air to water, so one of the things that we do at CE is we don't just trust manufacturer data. We go and test things in the field and see how they perform. So we're in the process of that with air to water. We're continuing to do more and more projects on those. When I ask the researchers where the issues lie, and they have said it's mostly around controls. So I don't know that it's like an inherent efficiency issue. It's just more about how they perform in the field.
Okay. Well, we're at time, but I have one last question, which is, if our cohort has additional questions for you, would you be willing to have us kind of send you a list of questions that whenever you could get to them, you'd be willing to answer?
Yes, absolutely. And I will also send you the link for the Minnesota Air Source Heat Pump Collaborative, which
Mhm.
has a collated FAQ of just really common questions that we get. So that's always a good place to start. And then we also have a kind of ask the expert thing through that, and those sometimes come back to me. So either way, yep, happy to.
Nice. Well, it might be both ways, and we will. The resources that you've spoken about, and probably then some, we'll get a list from you in the next week or so, and we will add it to the end credits of the recorded webinar that will go up on the Green New Deal Housing
Okay.
YouTube channel. Becky, you just always exceed expectations. You are so much fun to talk to. Yes, I wish we were all just kind of in a pub somewhere for hours. But
We should
Let's
do
go.
that.
Let's
Yes.
Do
go.
that
Let's
sometime.
go.
But for now on
Yeah.
the webinar, thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us on a Friday afternoon, and hope everybody has a lovely weekend.